At the Rafah border crossing between Egypt and Gaza, the UN chief urged international parties to work together to ensure aid reaches the Gaza Strip.
2 weeks after Hamas took around 200 Israelis hostage, our correspondent has visited a group in Tel Aviv that's trying to bring them home. At least 2 people die in Scotland as Storm Babet lashes parts of northern Europe with torrential rain and high winds.
Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu and Defense Minister Yoav Gallant visit troops near the border with Gaza ahead of an expected ground operation into the densely packed Palestinian enclave. But house-to-house urban fighting could drastically raise Gaza's death toll, as at least 3,785 Palestinians have already been killed in Israeli airstrikes, and millions are urgently waiting for much-needed aid such as water, food, medicine and fuel.
There is no contradiction in standing in solidarity with Israel and acting on the humanitarian needs of Palestinians.
As I said in Israel, as hard as it is, we cannot give up on peace. We cannot give up on a two-state solution. Israel and Palestinians equally deserve to live in safety, dignity, and peace.
An American cargo plane carrying armoured vehicles landed in Tel Aviv on Thursday, as US President Joe Biden said he would ask Congress for unprecedented aid for Israel. Meanwhile, US intelligence has reported that the explosion at the Al-Hali Arab Hospital killed between 100 to 300 people, whilst the Palestinian officials have said that at least 471 people were killed.
The UN Secretary-General arrived at the Egyptian side of the Rafah border crossing on Friday, where more than 200 trucks and some 3,000 tons of aid headed for Gaza were stationed. Antonio Gutteres called on all international parties to work together to ensure that humanitarian aid reaches Palestinians in the besieged Gaza Strip.
That needs everything to survive. So these trucks are not just trucks. They are a lifeline. They are the difference between life and death for so many people in Gaza. And to see them stuck here makes me be very clear. What we need is to make them move. To make them move to the other side of this wall. To make them move as quickly as possible and as many as possible.
Egyptian state-linked broadcaster Al Qahira News said that the Rafah crossing, which is the only route into Gaza, would reopen on Friday, but Cairo later said it needed more time to repair roads. The UN says the first aid delivery into the Gaza Strip via the Rafah border crossing should take place in the next day or so. Estimates suggest around 1 million people have been internally displaced in Gaza, including over 350,000 people staying in camps set up by the UN Relief and Works Agency for Palestine refugees.
At the headquarters of the Israeli Forum for the Hostages and Missing Families, lawyers, doctors, psychologists and media experts are working around the clock to try to bring the hostages back home. 2 weeks after the attacks, and with anxiety and anger rising amongst both families and volunteers, our correspondent Valerie Goria has visited the forum.
We are here to ask all governments and all bodies in the world to bring our people back. It's an unjustifiable, inhumane crime against humanity to hold innocent people hostage like this without any information about where they are, how they are doing, against dozens of people with critical medical conditions that need life-saving medication that they are not receiving, and we know nothing about what's happening with them.
There's also anger and frustration at the responses of their own government and the international community.
Our people are not getting any sort of assistance. We've begged everyone, including the Red Cross, including every international organization and government, to provide medical care for our loved ones, and that's not happening. We're not receiving any form of aid.
Dual Israeli-German citizen Yarden Roman Gat is among the missing. She was last seen desperately handing her 3-year-old daughter to her husband Eilon as they fled Hamas gunmen in the Be'eri kibbutz near Gaza.
I always hope that all those interviews, there are also groups of people, the Hamas, that are watching, and all I hope is that Maybe they'll release a video showing that she's safe and sound, saying how important it is for her daughter. How do you tell a 3-year-old that her grandmother was murdered by the bad people that got to her home? She saw them. She understands. I was just scared that she'll ask, is that the same thing that they're going to do tomorrow? I don't even want to think about how they treat them, what they do with them. That's going to be the new terror. That's going to be everywhere in the world. Today it's Israel and it's in the Gaza border and it's Jewish people. But tomorrow, who knows?
Yarden and her husband managed to escape their abductor's car, and as they ran, Yarden passed her child to him. But she wasn't fast enough to escape the chasing gunman.
Ukrainian army officials say their troops are holding out against fierce Russian efforts to gain control of Avdiivka, as Moscow seeks to surround the strategically important city in eastern Ukraine. A video posted by Ukraine's army on Thursday purports to show its commander-in-chief visiting the area. Kyiv says around 900 Russian soldiers were killed or wounded there on Thursday.
Каждый день у них какие-то потери есть. Минимум каждый день у них какие-то потери, потому что им сказали, позицию, они заняли. Им сказали, все, не отступать, И все. А их там потерь, видимо-невидимо. Ну, це я так говорю, я там их не считал, но каждый день у них потери.
As Ukraine's counter-offensive shows slow progress in Zaporizhia and Bakhmut, Russia is trying to regain the initiative. Russian state news agency TASS reports that President Vladimir Putin has visited military headquarters in Rostov-on-Don, near the border with Ukraine. TASS said he met with top military officials who told him Russian forces are, quote, fulfilling their military objectives.
With world leaders watching the Israel-Hamas conflict, there's concern the West will lose focus on its promise of unwavering support for Ukraine. The US has contributed more than 43 billion euros in military aid to Kiev to defend against Russian attacks. Some analysts say Russia will take advantage of what's transpiring in Gaza.
Russia has a lot to gain from it. The US will be a little bit more distracted. There is a little bit of fatigue both in Europe and with the US in terms of giving aid to Ukraine. We saw that there was already some withholding of aid from Warsaw. And if you look at the US, the Republicans, particularly the right-wing Republicans, they don't want to continue aiding Ukraine.
The future of America's support for Ukraine will likely hinge on the outcome of its 2024 presidential election.
The world can't really afford to allow the Russians to win. If we stop with Ukraine, who knows what will happen next? I mean, Russia has been very clear that they want to expand their sphere of influence. They have had a history of invading other countries, particularly when Putin's approval rating isn't particularly good. I think given how close Russia is to Europe's doorsteps and there should be genuine fear of Russia continuing to infringe on the European countries, whether it be indirectly or directly.
NATO diplomats meeting in Budapest raised security concerns over what they say is a deepening relationship between Russia and Hungary.
At least 2 people have died after Storm Babette brought torrential rain and 100km/h winds to Scotland. One woman was swept away by a swollen river in the Highlands, and a man was killed after a tree hit his van near Forfar in Angus. Hundreds of people have also been evacuated from their homes. Denmark has also been hit. Authorities have warned the country may endure the worst storm surge in more than 100 years.
Vi er jo i gang med at prøve at sikre det her område mod skader fra oversvømmelsen, og det gør vi ved at lægge de her dæmninger ud, som ligger her bag mig, som vi lige straks skal til at hælde noget vand i.
Ireland has also suffered its worst flooding for years. Several towns and villages were inundated, with some areas remaining underwater and without power on Thursday. Soldiers were called in to help evacuate people from the town of Middleton in County Cork. where more than 100 homes were flooded.
At least 26,000 people have been forced to leave their homes in eastern Ghana after abundant rainfalls caused 2 hydroelectric dams to overflow, resulting in extensive flooding. Some 8,000 people have been rescued in the Volta region bordering Togo. Roads and schools have been closed, and while no casualties have been reported, concerns have been raised over the next harvest as the floods have destroyed this season's crops.
The UK's ruling Conservative Party suffered a heavy defeat at the hands of the opposition Labour Party in 2 by-elections on Friday. Labour won the seat of Tamworth in central England and the largely rural mid-Bedfordshire seat, which had been in Conservative hands since 1931. The results are a serious cause for concern for Prime Minister Rishi Sunak. His Tory party are trailing in the national polls, and its losses solidify Labour's status as the front-runner ahead of a national election expected next year. Police in Warsaw have arrested a 22-year-old man over a bizarre series of thefts in a shopping centre in the Polish capital, which left security guards scratching their heads. After slipping into a clothes shop once the building was closed, police said the man put on new clothes, then froze in the shop window, pretending to be an exhibition mannequin. Before being arrested, he still had time to steal jewellery from a stand set up in one of the galleries. The man has been remanded in custody and faces a 10-year prison sentence.